Hi folks, for Tacitus Today, your pushback channel, and thank you for joining this audio live stream. In this essay, I'd like to talk about the relationship between Jewishness, if you like, and the superheroes that were created by almost exclusively Jewish writers, and many of them animators too. So let's have a little look at what's this Jewish obsession with superheroes? Why does such a small proportion of the then US population, we're talking like late 1920s, early 1930s, why are they so obsessed with creating these fantasy characters, these superheroes, Superman being one of the first? Now, and there's plenty going on after Superman, and various Superboy, Superdog, Supergirl, and so on, but also the host of other characters that we see going right through to the Marvel, the X-Men and the Incredible Hulk, and so on and so forth. Aquaman, for goodness sakes. All of these are created by, I think that Wonder Woman might be the only exception, and there's one other that I'll bring to mind in a minute, but pretty much all of these characters, all of these superhero characters are created by Jewish writers, and they're not Jewish as in they've entered the Gentile sort of world here. These are people, if they don't go to Jewish, like Hebrew schools, that they speak Yiddish frequently in the house. They if they're going to Gentile sort of government schools, then they're going and doing night school and weekend school at Jewish schools and so on. They're going to the synagogue and listening in rapture to the rabbi and all this. So they're very, very Jewish. They're not Americans in the sense of the Gentile America of the day. These are people that want to seriously hang on to their Jewishness and be very Jewish. So they're quite a separate culture and society from the Gentile society. So and they're very determined to keep it. They're not like they want to enter Gentile society but can't. They don't want to. So let's come sort of having a look at these superhero things now. The guys who created Superman, they were two scrawny sort of Jewish kids that got bullied at school. They were, as the story goes, they were at some traveling circus type road show, and there was the strong man there doing the lifting the weights and doing the muscle posing and all that sort of stuff. And the story goes anyway, they thought, well, gee, I wish I was as big and strong as this guy, muscles of steel, and I could kick the shit out of all of those punks at school that are bullying me. And so this was, what we need is a Superman. But it goes, that's the sort of thing. I'm not sure I buy that explanation, but anyway, the idea is that the Jewish people, and this is pre-Hitler, so this is before Hitler. The Jewish people at the time, their education system and their folklore and their myths and so on were very much bound up. In fact, it was integral to their understanding of themselves that they were an enslaved, oppressed people. And Moses, back in the day, had led them on the Exodus, had led them out of bondage in Egypt, and led them to their promised land. And God had punished the Egyptians for not letting, as Moses would say, let my people go. But there's within the myth there that it was. Moses was put in a, this is again the myth, Moses was put in a basket of like a little boat or floating basket of reeds in the River Nile, and as a baby, as an infant, only recently born, and he was left to float in there, and it just so happens he was found by the people of the Pharaoh, the Egyptian king, and was brought up as an Egyptian princeling, and But he had some sort of epiphany, and God spoke to him and said, "Well, actually, dude, you're an Israelite," as they called them in the day. And these people that Pharaoh has in bondage, building the pyramids and the like, they're your people, and you got to lead them out of there into the promised land. So that's the wider sort of story of Moses, and dovetails into the Ten Commandments and so on. This is very much part of the Jewish experience, very much part of the Jewish diaspora folklore, and it was a profound, it impressed upon all the Jewish kids that you are an oppressed, enslaved people, but a savior will come along. But every generation or so, those who would enslave you, an enslaver will come along. But we're just waiting for another Moses to turn up and lead us to salvation. So it's a people that are oppressed, hard done by people that are eternally, in all eternity, waiting for the moment of salvation. How is this going to arrive? Well, let's go back into the folklore now. That's what Jewish kids are taught. Maybe still, I don't know. So there's Moses, and the giving the son, your only son, who then lives among the Gentiles, but then comes to free the Jews. Again, this is part of their folklore. But also there's Samson. Now, Samson was a guy in Samson and Delilah. Samson was a guy in the sort of the Old Testament, again, folklore. And Samson was a seriously strong dude. But the secret of his strength was his long hair. So if you cut his hair, then his strength was gone. And so his hair was cut, and he was tied up by the bad guys, whoever it was. He was tied up, but they forgot about his hair, and his hair grew back, and then they blinded him, I think it was. His hair grew back, so he pulled down their temple, their religious place, pulled down their temple, and using his great strength, which had returned because of his longer hair. But Samson also had many, many other capabilities. He could jump from great distances, miles, and he could run very fast, and he had the strength of 100 men, or and these sorts of things. And in the myth, with a donkey's jawbone, he slayed the evil ones, and so he's a guy of great capability. He could see vast distances. So when you look at the creation of Superman, you're looking at someone who has the powers of Samson, but also is a deliverer of the oppressed. The bad guys get their asses well and truly kicked if Superman's around. And he has these great powers to jump vast distances and fly and super strength and so on and so forth. So he's very much modeled on the character of Samson, if you will, and also fits into the idea of this savior that's coming along. Now, it probably wouldn't have worked. Well, it wouldn't have worked if they fashioned it as some dude who'd come along to help the Jews in America, deal with those pesky Gentiles. That probably wouldn't have gone down very well. So Superman's just a deliverer of the oppressed. But in the overall sort of psychological victim architecture of the Jews at the time, remember, this is pre-Hitler. This is before Hitler. And they're an oppressed, enslaved people waiting for a deliverer. Superman is their image, if you like, of a deliverer, has great powers. But people can't bring him down. No one messes with Superman. And Superman was just doing sort of good at the time, as in, he wasn't a political character or anything like that. He was, someone was getting beaten up down a back alley, Superman would appear and kick the ass. So he's very much dealing with the bullies and the thugs and the hoods and so on. But then this comes back to the experience of these two Jewish guys, the young Jewish guys that created this idea of Superman. Now, if they went round, peddling their idea, the only people who were going to give them any sort of a hearing were other Jewish people who owned publishing houses or comic strips in the newspapers, the funny papers, or all this sort of stuff. So really, the whole thing, from concept to getting printed and getting out into the public domain, it was very much a Jewish gig from beginning to end. And again, all these other characters that were created. Now, if you go back to the time, so we're looking at late 1920s, early 1930s, or even earlier than the 1920s, the most of the Jews in the United States, not all, but most of the Jews in the United States had come from the Russian Empire. Now, because of the Jewish fixation of speaking Yiddish in the house and having these Jewish communes and virtual kibbutz type things around what were at the time Ukraine and parts of Russia, this sort of caused, and their Marxist activism, this which is a threat to the state, this caused the Tsarist regime in the Russian Empire to look upon them with huge suspicion. And why aren't you integrating into? Why aren't you joining the Russian Orthodox Church? Why aren't you speaking Russian in the house? Why are you living this very separate thing? So once political activism, many of the political activists and people planting bombs and doing all that, many of these were Jewish and avowed Marxists and wanting communist societies. Now, even then, the Jews took the view that or many did, I'm sure not all, but many took the view that if we had a society of absolute equality, a 100% socialist communist society, that everybody would be equal, and then Jews would never be victimized or enslaved or whatever again. So this was sort of an objective to how do we make our problems go away? Well, that'll do it. And this went down like a lead balloon with the Russian authorities at the time, the Tsarist Russian Empire authorities. So a lot of they were called the pogroms. A lot of the Jews got kicked out of Russia, and then we're talking wider Russia, which includes part of Poland, Ukraine, Belarus, Russia proper, and there were a lot of Jews there who got kicked out. Then the Russian Revolution, guys like Leon Trotsky were Jews from Ukraine. So anyway, these people all came to the United States, or many of them, not all, many of them came to the United States, and they brought their absolute grim determination to stay and be Jewish, but also bringing the fairy tales, the folklore, and all this sort of stuff. Moses, the Exodus, the whole nine yards, and stuck to this. So at the time, the view that the Jewish activists had was really their whole being was built around this enslavement, and the example that was pushed heavily was, of course, this Egyptian thing, this Moses and let my people go. Not that the Tsarist regime didn't come in for a good shellacking and a kicking. They did, but it hadn't embedded itself in the folklore. The folklore was Egypt and Moses, and they stuck to that, and it was put around as an inspiration to every Jewish kid, really, from what I can see, that we're an enslaved, oppressed people waiting for a deliverer. So you see all these superheroes are at the time are really they're deliverers. Now they've softened it out, so the Superman is a deliverer of all the good people against the bad guys, the dudes that would bash them up down the back alley or whatever. So Superman's looking after everybody, not specifically looking after just Jewish people. But if you look at the characters that as they developed on from there and later on, the X-Men are the outsiders. They're the victimized ones. They're the gay people. They're the different ones. And you see this even in shows like Dark Angel and things like that, the James Cameron TV series. Jessica Alba was fronted that one. Now looking at the characters that came afterwards, so as the 1930s progressed, say around 1935 or so, things took a turn. By this stage, the Nazis were in government in Germany, and initially they were just asking the Jews to leave. So there was, give or take, about 400,000 Jews in Germany at the time. And the Nazi government saying, look, we'd like you to leave. We'll help you go. We'll provide interpreters. We'll assist you. And they put quite a lot of resources there. We'll assist you go to embassies in, US embassy or British or whatever, so you can get migrate to those countries. And about half, give or take, about half the Jews in Germany did go. Einstein and people like that. So the better educated, the skilled and all that, they did. But the ordinary Jews really had no skills, like maybe the guy who works in the corner delicatessen or something. They didn't have, they couldn't get out. They couldn't speak English or any other language. They weren't particularly well educated. They had no particular skills. So given that the Great Depression was on at the time, and all countries were only taking the most exceptionally skilled migrants, and everyone else was being denied a migrant visa, immigrant visa, then those other Jews in Germany, again, about half of the total that were there, they stayed in Germany. For a lot of them, it didn't work out, as we know, it didn't work out so well. So as it became clearer that two things. One is the Nazis were getting tough on the Jews that still remained, give or take about 200,000. This is out of a population of what was 80 million, by the way. And that the countries around the world, the United States and so on, weren't taking low-skilled migrants, given, again, the Great Depression and 25% unemployment and so on. The Jews took this up as something of a cause célèbre, and this is when characters that they further created that were helping outsiders and helping the oppressed as a class rather than just an individual case of someone getting robbed around the corner. So this is when the superhero thing began to change. Now, following the 1940s, the script flipped and Moses was sort of relegated to a lower status of something that happened in the long distance past. Not that Moses wasn't still playing a prominent part, it was, but the issue now was the Holocaust. So that completely flipped the script, if you will, on this, that we've now got a new cause, and it's not Moses, it's the Holocaust, and it's Hitler. So a lot of the superheroes that were created post that time reflect that change in script. And I've been into Jewish people's houses where they've got entire rooms, like a decent sized bedroom with wall, ceiling to floor, bookshelves, and every wall covered, where they've got nothing but Holocaust literature there and books there. And you wouldn't think there's that many books being written, but there is. And you still today see movies and TV shows that are determined that, this shall never be forgotten type thing. So, but coming back again to the superheroes, now, as a kid, I never thought about it. As a kid, I never thought about Jewish people at all, other than the Moses and the Let My People Go and the Israelites. I didn't know anything, didn't care. And so, and there was kids in my class, Berg and Stein and so. Again, I never even thought about it. It's only when I first went to the United States that I realized the hair trigger levels of, frantic activism from the Jewish diaspora. Something I was quite amazed and taken aback by. What's that got to do with anything? When first I went to New York, one of the guys to meet me at the airport was a Jewish guy, and I don't think I've ever met an angrier man in my life. As we were driving from the airport to this office, he screamed and shouted at everyone, "Welcome to the fucking United States of fucking America, you fucking motherfucker. Yeah, motherfucker." And this was it. He's like that for the whole drive. I'm looking out of the corner, I'm like, wow. But anyway, this superhero thing, it changed to represent the outsiders being oppressed. And again, you see this very much with the X-Men and in the more recent sort of Marvel stories as well. They're trying to gin up that side of things. Now, on the matter of the Jews, I went back and this surprised me. there were a lot of writers who, like Stan Lee, for example, from who created a lot of the X-Men stuff and whatnot. I didn't realize he was Jewish. His name's actually Lieber. And as I went through all the writers that are sort of Gentile type, anglicized their names, one after the other, next one, they're all Jewish. Anderson was Abraham's, and Jones was Jacob's, and the list just goes on. And I found there was, I only came across one that wasn't Jewish, which was the Wonder Woman. So this is an interesting sort of relationship between superheroes, the role of superheroes in the myths of the Old Testament, and the perception of Jewishness, and the role of the Jewish diaspora, or the position of the Jewish diaspora in a Gentile society, and where they insist they have to be, but where they simultaneously claim victimhood and enslavement, and waiting for a savior, which is going to kick the ass of all the bad guys, which is all the Gentiles, I assume. And Superman really was part of that Moses, Samson myth that was brought to life by these Jewish guys in, again, pre-Hitler 1920s America. You've been fantastic today, your Pushback channel, and thank you for listening.